I just want to look at this really quickly because I feel like it's a microcosm of the right-wing hysteria concerning the Nashville shooting and transgender people right now. Sort of like a micro example of the hypocrisy of their line of thinking. Okay, it's very revealing to me. So I was on Twitter the other night. Always a mistake. I ratioed Ben Shapiro a couple times. Okay, fine, great. You know, well, we're all very proud of me. But I seriously want to take a look at this, okay? So Ben Shapiro tweeted something here. NBC News says, fear pervades Tennessee's trans community amid focus on Nashville shooter's gender identity. We were already fearing for our lives, now it's even worse. And Ben says, trans person murders Christian school children. Media, but how does this affect trans people? So right off the bat, you have to think, like, the only reason this is a trans issue is because of right-wing media. The manifesto of the shooter has not been released yet, which means that right now, for what we know, the fact that the shooter was trans is as relevant to what happened as their height, as the fact that they wore a hat, as them being white. Like it is just an incidental factor, you know? Otherwise disconnected from the matter at hand. Is there even a manifesto? We hear there is, yeah. All we know is that it's long and rambling. I think the police reported that much. We don't know its contents. They said they would not release it during an active investigation, which has some precedent. I don't think we should think that's a suspicious thing necessarily. Sometimes manifestos contain information about people associated with the shooter, which means that there's, like they want to keep that close to their chest. It's possible. Anyway, so of course I wisely point out here that conservative media did not talk about basically all other shootings ever, as though they were a product of cisgender evil. And this here, I think what Ben chooses to respond with is really fascinating. If a straight white man murdered a bunch of children at a progressive school in the name of anti-trans politics, it would dominate the news cycle for months and become the center of the 2024 presidential cycle. Guy, perish the thought. Could you imagine a straight white man killing a bunch of innocent people in the name of reactionary politics? Could you imagine something like that? I don't know if that's ever happened before. Now, the fact that he chose to respond with this suggests to me, I mean, think about what he chose to respond with, right? So I'm essentially saying right here, you're the one who's choosing to hyperfixate on the transness. That's your choice. You didn't do this with non-trans people. And his response is, well, if it happened in reverse, it would be a big deal too. So I point out the Club Q shooting. Far-right lunatic shot up Club Q and killed 5 people just a few months ago. You ghouls were barely able to denounce him. Oh, and remember, Twitter was full of people saying that it was based, that the Club Q shooter killed those people. Far-right pundits were blaming transgenderism and LGBTQ ideology. They were saying stuff like this is just going to happen as long as clubs like this exist. Tim Pool said it was because there was grooming going on in that club. Was any evidence to this claim supplied? No, he just said it, Most politically motivated shootings are directly attributable to far-right ideology. Ben Shapiro himself has been named in multiple manifestos. Remember? It's not like all time and time again. It's not just Ben, but it's like there are so many shootings, and then the manifesto comes out, and it's like, oh yeah, they're far right. And then you take a look at their internet history, and their internet history is just them watching people like Ben Shapiro. Shapiro blames the left for Club Q. Literally, right here. The entire left-wing legacy media, virtually every major Democrat in the country, smeared traditional conservatives who oppose SSM. Drag Queen Story Hour, Trans the Kids blame them for the Club Q shooting. They're hacks and liars. They've been exposed as such. So this was after the shooter lied and claimed they were non-binary. But they all did that too. They all played with the lie as well. Like this far-right guy with like neo-Nazi views was like, oh, by the way, I identify as an attack helicopter. And all of the pundits on the right were like, there you go. Actually, haha, look, actually, it was you guys. And they know they're lying when they do this. Never buy into the idea that this is actually some kind of like So it's just some extraordinary degree of mental incompetence on their part. They're aware they're doing it, and the reason they're doing it is, of course, because they want you dead. They will lie about literally anything they can in order to facilitate a hate movement against you. And he did it here, too. He said, "You mean the far-right lunatic who threatened to blow up his mother in 2021? I don't know what this has to do with the claim." I actually don't get this. I have no idea what defeater this is meant to offer. And identified as gender non-binary in 2022. And then, of course, like, I just posted wiki links, you know, about how he's clearly far right. And then he stopped responding, obviously. There was also somebody who replied to me, and they were saying something like, yeah, the person was non-binary and they were anti-queer, and that was because they were self-hating. Let me see if I can I probably shouldn't just like scroll through Twitter, because that's always dangerous, but I just, if I reply to them, I feel like they should be further up on like the response. You know what I mean? Like, it seems kind of weird they'd be all the way down. Did they delete the tweet? Okay, whatever. The point was, they were saying that it was self-hating, and I was pointing out that if a non-binary person hated themselves so much that they were a neo-Nazi and killed other queer people, they would just be a far-right non-binary person. Another component of the right's effort to sort of, in an essentialist fashion, demonize the trans community is to always push the idea that if a person is black and they do something bad, it's because of their left-wing ideology. If a person is trans or non-binary, in reality, there are far-right people who are a part of like every demographic group, and they know this, again, because they're fully aware of the fact, and they've, you know, accused in this line of white people being like left lunatics. So they will simultaneously claim that the media will accuse any white, you know, shooter or whatever of being a product of conservative, political views, which often they are. But at the same time, they're willing to go, oh, well, look at this nutter, point at a white person, go, ah, well, they're far left. So they're clearly capable, in the abstract, of acknowledging that a person being, say, for example, white, doesn't necessarily bear on where they fall when it comes to the likelihood of them committing a terror attack in the name of any given ideology. But when it comes to being trans or non-binary or whatever else, they will always automatically put you in that category. And the reason for that is, again, because the fascist has to, everything must be it has to be a 5-signal alarm to the fascist. Everything has to be civilization ending. And it all has to stem from the exact same root, which is degeneracy. All of it. All social evil in the mind of a conservative has to be rooted in this central rot from which everything expands outwards like tentacles. You know, this was a huge component of arguments against Jewish Bolshevism from I say neo-Nazis reflexively. They're the original Nazis. You know, when you look back and like read historical sources, it's almost comedic how the Nazis would blame literally everything on Jews. I mean, with basically no exceptions. It wasn't possible for there to be like incidental problems or for there to be unrelated problems. Society is complicated. Nothing is ever caused by just one thing. But to them, in this case, it literally was. Everything, every shortage, every mechanical failure, every crime, all of it, it either had to be directly by Jewish people or Jewish ideology. And of course, Jewish ideology means anything they didn't like, whether or not it had anything to do with Jewish people. And I think what we're seeing here is essentially the same trend. There has to be a cohesive, like, block discrimination. It's not possible for the right to gesture nuance to say, oh, well, you might have like these social problems and these. It all has to be rooted from a specific source, which, again, in their worldview is always going to be degeneracy in sort of like the broadest social sense. But yeah, Ben's fully aware of it. I mean, I consider Ben to be by far the most human of the Daily Wire people, but he knows he's lying for sure. He's fully aware. He knows. That's why he stopped engaging. That's why he said all the stuff that he said. That's why he made the ridiculous tweet like, oh, well, hypothetically, if a far-right person killed a bunch of people, you know, like, he knows. He's aware of the fact that he's lying. They all are. They're paid to lie. Every single conservative pundit. Maybe there are some true believers. It's, you know, I can't magically determine which are true believers and which aren't, but yeah. And that's the state of things, you know? It's like this from all of them. Ben's being the least hysterical of the conservative commentators. 2 hours ago, Candace Owens said that transgenderism will lead to, you know, in spite of the fact that her chosen presidential candidate was a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein, and Republicans are, as we speak, fighting to defend underage marriages. Doesn't matter. Reality doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that if you take a look at the list of people who get arrested for child sexual abuse, it's just a litany of like church people, you know, like youth pastors and so on and so forth. No, it doesn't matter. Um, they know they're lying. And when you're dealing with a political body that knows it's lying at virtually every step of the way, you know, you really struggle. Um, you really struggle for any kind of like cohesive answer. Rhetorically, I mean, don't get me wrong. The pundits know they're lying. There are adherents to the ideology who think this stuff is sincere, who believe this stuff, and they can be reached. But broadly, you know, the biggest thing, the most important thing that you could possibly do in a situation like this is to just not let them have the power to enact their terrible ideas, which is why we need to win the Supreme Court vote in Wisconsin, which is why it's so important for us to continue to put effort. Hello. To continue to put effort into electoral victories. Never before have electoral victories been more essential to the well-being of marginalized people in this community because, again, is it satisfying? Well, yes, actually. From what I hear, you know, actually, pretty much everyone who's come from my community over to canvassing found it incredibly satisfying. So, yeah, yeah, I will say so. Is it satisfying in the broad abstract sense of like, oh, you know, well, we got a Democrat in? Ah, yeah, you know, I know. They're not all Karl Marx, sure. But my God, can you imagine a more important time for Republicans to not have majorities in any seat of power? Please.